The gentleman from Delaware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I have about 3 questions here. I'm going to try to put them all together, so this might get a little complicated. But last month, I asked Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke whether Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac serve their purpose and whether we should be looking at some different way to finance mortgages since the problems we have, the expense of them at this point. And he responded that the Fed has been very vocal on this issue for years. He said we need to be very cautious about returning to the existing structure with potential conflicts between private shareholders and public objectives, and suggested either privatization with government guarantees or a public utility approach. My first question is, would you agree, or could you comment on that assessment? My second question is, using the Federal Home Loan Bank model, is that something you could actually substitute for all this in terms of what we're doing or not doing as far as the future is concerned? They don't seem to have had the problems that the other GSEs have had. And then my last point is, what about just eliminating all these support systems, just a system whereby institutions which are making loans have to stand on their own in terms of what they are doing? I'm not necessarily saying I advocate that or you do. I just would be curious about your comments on it.
I agree with the quote you attributed to Paul Volcker about his diagnosis of what happened, what caused the problem in this context. He's absolutely right. And I think the 2 options you summarized there should be among the options we take a careful look at. I think the Federal Home Loan Bank system is not without challenge today. And I think, as the chairman said at the beginning, when you look at the housing finance markets and reform of the GSEs, you have to look at the FHLB structure as well to make sure that it can play the role it's designed to play, again, without leaving us with too much risk in the future that the government's going to have to come in to step in to underwrite those losses. You ended by asking, is it possible to advocate a system in which the government plays no role in providing support for mortgage finance market through explicit guarantees, subsidies, support for liquidity? And I think there is certainly a pure theoretical option in which that may make sense, but my own view is there's probably going to be a good economic case, good public policy case for some continued provision of a carefully designed guarantee by the public sector going forward, because housing markets are so critical to overall economic activity. They play such a large role in people's wealth, their perception of wealth. They are very vulnerable to volatility when you experience broader financial markets, shocks to the financial system. And because of that unique role housing markets play, I think there's likely to be a good public policy case, good economic case, likely that both conservatives and liberals could agree on, for the design of a carefully calibrated guarantee, appropriately priced, that would continue in some form.
What do you think the timetable on all this is? We've had a lot of discussion, some hearings now, and that kind of thing. Is this something that you feel needs to be addressed in the next 2 or 3 months or within a year, or do you have any thoughts about the timetable of how quickly Congress and the administration should move on these issues?
I think realistically it's going to take several months to do a careful exploration of the problems, solutions, alternative models, and to try to shape legislation that could command consensus. And again, I think we're at the point now where we can start that process in earnest, and I think we should try and get it right. But I don't see why this should take years. I mean, I think we're really at the moment now where there's a huge, compelling need to make sure we design the successor system. And it's very hard, I think, for anybody to argue that we can live with a system as it now is indefinitely in the future. I know people are worried that we're not going to take advantage of this moment together and put in place reforms, because many people tried in the past and failed to get consensus. But I don't think we face that risk now, frankly, because I think no one can look at the model we have today and say we can afford to live with that model going forward. So I suspect you're going to find very broad support for reform. The challenge is going to be just to design something that we think is going to work better in the future. Well,
I would agree with you that it's going to take time to put it together, but I would hope that we could work on it together as rapidly as possible. There's a lot of dollars out there and a lot of correction which is needed. And thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman